So Birger, where were you born?
I was born in Sweden, Stockholm, Sweden.
And what is your earliest remembrance of wanting to come to America?
Oh, I was probably about 8, 9, 10 years old.
Mm-hmm. And what about America? Why did you want to be here?
Oh, I embraced everything about America. What I saw in the magazines, what I watched on television, and because my dad traveled to the United States several times, he brought home things from the U.S. and I was just excited about everything, particularly about airplanes and cars and the way the homes looked here, how big they were, and how big everything was here. I like cowboys, ranches. Just ordinary American life. Even things inside the homes, like the big couches, L-shaped couches and rounded couches, and the big refrigerators in different colors. And this was in the 50s, and I liked the music. And of course, I got caught by the rock and roll and Elvis and Ricky Nelson and everything else, and country music, country and western, and. I was fortunate enough to, a little later on in life, travel over here. That was in the early 60s, to come over here with my parents and experience the U.S. And
was it everything you thought it would be?
When I came here, yeah, in the early years it was. I really enjoyed the coming here as a tourist with my parents several times to mainly California and Florida, but we traveled other places too because I had relatives up in Massachusetts. My grandmother's brother immigrated to the U.S. in probably around 1920 or so, and he met another Swedish woman here in the United States, and they got married and had a daughter, and so we went up to visit them in Massachusetts. And but of course, I like California and Florida better than Massachusetts. But coming here in 1971 to live here, actually for a bit of a time, the 3 months I came over as a trainee to work for McDonnell Douglas, and that summer I got the whiff of everything. Really. I actually met my first wife working there too, and I used to go to the drag races, dragged her along, and we went to rodeos, and I tried to get as much as I could in those 3 months that I was here, and I actually ended up marrying her after 3 months too. And then I went back to Sweden to finish up my degree, and I came back here. We both did, and we came back here in 1972. And I got hired back to McDonnell Douglas, and so did my wife.
So Barry, you said that you came back here. Now, how did you initially get the right to work here in California?
I got it through marriage. Because I married my first wife, and I applied for a visa, and which was a bit of a procedure. Just to give a little background, and it was very popular in the 50s, which was the 60s, for Europeans to come to the United States. A lot of people wanted to come here, and there was a quota for each country. They would only let in so many people every year, and usually the waiting list turned out for the person to be 5 or 6 years before they got a visa. Now, I was lucky because I married my first wife, so I got it pretty quickly. But what I had to do is I had to get a sponsor, and I had to go and get medical checkup with American-approved doctors in Sweden. Not just any doctor. They had to be approved by the U.S. government. and that was a bit of a process, but and it cost some money. But I got my green card and moved back here in 1972, and I lived here for about 3 years. And in 1975, I actually went back to Sweden with my first wife for 9 years, and I was a fool because I worked for Scandinavian Airlines, so I came over here twice a year during those 9 years. And if I had known it, I would have kept my green card. But nobody told me that all I had to do was come back here once a year and I would keep it up. So when I moved back to Sweden, when I first got there, I tried to be what I thought was legal. So I turned in my green card to the U.S. Embassy. And nobody there told me either that, or asked me if I was going to go back to the U.S. So 9 years later, when we wanted to return to the U.S., I had to go through the same process again,
And what's that process?
Get a sponsor, get the medical checkup by U.S. approved doctors, pay the money, get the vaccinations, and then eventually, I got it back. And that was in 1984, and I've had the same green card ever since. And
knowing what you went through twice to come to America, to live here and have a life here, which was the fulfillment of your dream, what do you think about the policies now where people can just crash across the border?
I think it's absolutely horrible. Just letting people in without knowing anything about them, no medical records or no criminal records for each person, just letting them in, and it's coming in waves across the border. And where are they going to go here? What are they going to do here? It's going to take them a while to assimilate and maybe get jobs, or the government's going to support them. They don't have sponsors like I had to get. I had to get the sponsor. I couldn't have gotten in here.
Tell me, did you feel when you were going through that process where you had to get the doctor and you had to get the shots and you had to get a sponsor, did you feel discriminated against?
Not really. I just knew that the United States was different back in the 50s and 60s, and they were a lot more protective of everything than they are today. And so yeah, it was a little bit of a hassle. I didn't really feel discriminated, but I feel why should I have to go through it? And on the other flip side, other people just storm the borders, the lack of borders, and come in here. It's just not a good system.
How do you feel about the America that you came to? Not necessarily now, but how have you always felt about America in general?
Well, I was almost elated to come here. I was very happy to be here. I have seen it changed over the years, so today I'm not quite as excited as I used to be. I'm still happy to be here, but a lot of my initial excitement has worn off, and but Sweden has probably changed too, in fairness. But yeah, the America that I came to love back in the 70s, basically 60s and 70s, it's not the same as it used to be. It's very, very divisive now, and it's a very strange social atmosphere. Another interesting thing is that when I came here, and this shows how the United States has changed actually over the years. When I came here in early 70s, I was considered basically a liberal, because Americans were still hung up pretty much, especially the older generation, on Sweden and sex and naked women and all that idiotic stuff, and other things too. But I haven't changed my opinion or my beliefs except for one thing in all these years, and I am now considered a conservative here. with my same values and everything that I had in 71. But this is how society here has changed, the way they perceive me now, as opposed to, back in 71, 50 years ago. I have changed my mind on one thing. I used to be opposed, probably because of my Swedish background, that, the openness about guns here. But today, living here and knowing how it is in the United States, I am definitely, in favor of the Second Amendment and being a gun owner.
Do you find it's going to be necessary, or now it's kind of a necessary evil?
It's a safety thing to me, If somebody threatens me, I will not hesitate to use it. But as they told us in Arizona, when I asked somebody where we lived, about 8 out of 10 people had guns. The guy said, well, just make sure they're inside the house and you don't shoot them in the back.
Yeah.
when you use a gun.
When they come in your house, they're not there for any good, that's for sure.
I would say it's the last 2 or 3 years has definitely changed my mind about guns. It's definitely.
What advice would you give any administration, not just the current, but any administration, on how to ward off what happened in your country and in Europe for not happening here?
Are you talking about the socialism that's coming here? Well, I grew up with it, so basically I've only known socialism in Europe, and it's not as bad, number one, as most people think. But when I came to the U.S., I felt an economic freedom. I don't know how else to put it. That I didn't feel in Europe, mainly because of the high taxes. And yes, there's a flip side to it. You get your medical benefits covered and so forth. But still, the way socialism is pushed by the left here, I would say I would rather live in a socialistic country in Europe than in a socialistic United States. I think that especially Sweden and the Scandinavian countries, that socialism isn't that bad in Europe. I think sometimes people have a hard time distinguishing between socialism in Western Europe and what was socialism or communism in the Soviet Union.
So what you're saying is the difference here is that if socialism comes into America, you're going to lose that economic freedom.
Definitely, yes.
So it's not a good thing when government tries to be the ultimate power.
That's right. Well, it's a matter of preferring capitalism to socialism.
And you coming here as a liberal, then having them change you to a conservative, from a socialism to now you're a capitalist.
Yeah.
Which way would you rather live?
Well, I'd rather live the old United States way, capitalism and the free enterprise. That was one of the, to me, another great benefit here, that it was a lot easier to open up open up a business here as opposed to in Europe. You can still do it there, but it's a lot of red tape, and it's a lot more freedom here to do what you want to do.
Knowing your dream from the early 50s of coming to America and just wanting to embrace the lifestyle that was presented to you through your media over there in Sweden and things that you had seen here in America when you visited, do you understand why these people are trying to cross the border to get here?
I do understand why they do that, yes, definitely. But a country without borders is not a country. It's got to have a controlled immigration. I'm not saying they shouldn't let immigrants in. I'm just saying it should be controlled.
like it was when you had to go through the process.
I had to go through, yes.
Yeah, and you went through the process twice, and you never felt discriminated against.
No, I didn't.
No, because you knew that was the process that was going to make it safe for you and for other people.
Yeah, and I accepted it. It's that was a rule of the United States, and you abide by it.
So the people that are just flooding in here with no apparent way of making a living or to feed themselves or their families, how do you feel about that?
I wonder where they're going to go. Where are they going to go here? What are they going to do? Seems to me that the two ways they can go, unless they have some kind of education or get illegally employed, it's going to go either crime or it's going to go welfare, or maybe both. I don't know what other options there are. I'm sure there are some that are self-starters too, that can open up a little hole-in-the-wall restaurant or something, but the majority of them, and if they're kids, what are the kids going to do? Somebody has to take care of the kids.
Yeah.
You can't just let them in and just leave them unattended.
Just dump them unattended and uneducated in what they need to do.
Yeah, and there's a language problem too, I think. I'm pretty sure that most of the ones that come in are not university students. They're, come from a different background. And
So-
they're basically from, third world countries. And I can understand why they want to come here, but you just can't open the floodgates and have them storm in. It's got to be
Organized.
controlled.
Yeah, and controlled and organized. And control is not a bad thing when it's, whether it's a river or a flood. I'd rather have a river than a flood,
Yeah.
because that's controlled. What did you do to prepare yourself to come to America? Because you had been grown up with a whole other language.
Well, I learned English very early on. I was taught in school. I was probably about somewhere around 10 years old, I think, when I first started learning English. And because I grew up in Europe, there are a lot of trade between the European countries, and so in school I also was taught French and German. So Europe is a small entity. It's probably maybe the size of the United States, with a lot of countries with different languages, and the European countries had to rely on each other, and to communicate, you automatically, learned other languages.
Mm-hmm. If you could talk to any of the people coming across the border from any country, what would your advice to them be?
Well, I know if I went to a country where I didn't speak the language, I wouldn't know what to do, basically. So I think one of the first things they should do is learn the language. Mm-hmm. It's not necessarily helped by printing everything in their native tongue. That's not an incentive for them to go and learn the language of their new country, mm-hmm. in my opinion.
So as an immigrant yourself, twice, how do you see a way out of this mess that is happening at our border?
Well, whether you're a Trump fan or not, I think the Trump approach was the right approach to fence off the borders, create borders, and then let people in. And
advice of what any immigrant from any country should do based on your experience. How do you feel they should handle it, and how can our present government and any government to come remediate this problem?
Well, the number one thing would be to learn the language. And actually the government could help with that by providing classes. It's interesting that when my first wife moved with me to Sweden, the Swedish government actually paid her to go and learn Swedish. So she she learned enough to get by, and I think that might be an approach, rather than just, you know, handing money left and right, but providing for the immigrants a teacher or teaching to learn the language quickly.
So that they can communicate their needs and everything.
You have to get a job and to get customers. If you have a business, you got to be able to communicate with them.
Yeah. And let's just say, you know, a lot of times people say, well, nobody asked me. But if somebody asked you, how would you fix this problem besides teaching them to speak English?
Well, again, it goes back to what I said. You know, you let in only so many a year, probably. You got to have some kind of a limitation on it, because the country can only absorb so many, you know, every year, or you're gonna, you know, have a real problem.
Yeah.
Because these immigrants somehow's got to get out in society and become functioning members, and it doesn't always happen overnight.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, I thought that was interesting, that people should hear your perspective of somebody who not only had to go through the process once, but you had to go through it twice. How you feel it could be remedied, because it had to be remedied on your side. You needed to have the language and you needed to have the skills. And also you needed to live long enough by getting the proper, you know, medical attention on both sides of the border, so that not only were you safe, but you were making people in the process safe also, that you weren't bringing anything from their country. Any final words?
Well, I hope this gets solved real quickly, or it's going to become, it already is a big problem, but it's going to be, country's not going to be able to handle it, period, in the long run.